Hi everyone, welcome to the Learning to Birth webinar series where we interview some of the world's most inspiring and interesting thought leaders around birth and pregnancy. And today we have with us Dr. Barb Morrison. Welcome, welcome Barb.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Look everyone, Barb is, Dr. Barb, obviously, you got a PhD. And you're a registered nurse and a nurse midwife. Barb is also an educator, teaching an understanding of birth, newborns, and newborn and family adaptation, kangaroo care, breastfeeding, bonding, and changing healthcare practices to provide optimal care for newborns and their families for the last 30 years. That's an incredible life and an incredible mouthful there, Barb.
It is.
Walking encyclopedia on babies, hey.
I think I've come to that just about, but there's so much, like we were talking right before, you were saying you were doing this series for moms. I kind of feel the same way. There is so much that moms and others need to know, and just isn't out there that I need to get into doing that, getting the message out, helping parents appreciate what newborns can do, and things of that nature. And with my midwifery background, natural birth, it all kind of comes together through pregnancy. Though my primary focus these days is more on skin-to-skin contact or kangaroo care and breastfeeding, because the two of those are intertwined.
What brought you to your love of babies and helping new families with their babies?
I think originally it was an area that I didn't think I'd get into after nursing school, because they kept saying, people don't leave this area. But I was in Seattle and had the opportunity to do it and just fell in love with it, with obstetrics and with helping moms birth. I've always liked little kids, and that's just kind of stuck. So because my specialty area was obstetrics when I started teaching, that's what I was teaching. And I had the opportunities then to do some things like take Dr. Barry Brazelton's training on the NBAS, his Neonatal Behavioral Assessment Scale, which was a great way to begin to learn more about what babies can do and what the range of normal is and things of that nature. So just the opportunities have been put before me. In 2001, when I moved to Cleveland, I met Jean Anderson and Doctors Jean Anderson and Susie Ludington, both of whom are nurses. Susie is also a midwife, and they're the ones who had brought the kangaroo care for preterm infants to the United States. And I kind of fell into that group, or was invited to join the group, I guess I should say. And but my mantra has always been full-term newborns, feeling that parents of full-term newborns, yeah, they may be healthy, they need as much help and support and knowledge as those who have kids in the NICU or are sick or something like that.
Yes, look, absolutely. It's like I went from being a working professional woman to being a mum at home, and it was overwhelming. Suddenly, like this whole new world opened up, and and you're not prepared, and because you don't know, you can get very scared and worried, and you don't know. This was like, you don't know who to reach out to. Facebook back then
right.
wasn't big like it is now. There's a lot of groups you can reach out to now, but back then it didn't exist. So I guess, do you want to talk about what your passion is, like kangaroo care? Like, what is it? How does it all start?
Kangaroo care, the history of it was started when Doctors Martinez and Ray from Bogota, Colombia went up into the hills, and they found a grandmother who was carrying a child, an infant, skin to skin. And they came to realize that the baby was staying warm and thriving well. And they didn't have enough incubators so that they could come back and use it as an incubator. Here in the States, and I think around the world, for full terms, we're now calling it skin-to-skin contact or skin-to-skin care. And by recommendation of the WHO and now most governments, starting immediately after birth, as long as the infant is healthy, they are to be placed skin to skin on mom's chest with a diaper on, so they don't make too much of a mess. And skin to skin means no bra, no clothing, no nothing between baby and mom. Now, this, what I've learned in knowing that first hour, and some will call it the miracle hour or the golden hour, whatever, it's very key because, first of all, mom will keep baby warm. Breasts will warm up or cool down depending upon what baby needs. So when baby's first introduced to this much colder environment outside the womb, once we've dried them off and we put them here, then their temperatures will stabilize. But even more interesting, and what I always call my second miracle related to birth, first being a birth itself and a healthy kid being born. But the second is then to watch what babies will do when they're in skin-to-skin contact. And they literally go through, I believe Widstrom said 9 different phases that they go through from the time they are put on the chest until they get over, will latch onto the nipple themselves, and then ultimately will fall asleep, and mom will as well. What is also going on is that when you put mom and baby together, the oxytocin, which is the hormone that helps with all of the contractions and everything, sometimes known as the hormone of love, hormone of caring. It's just one of the basic hormones in all social relationships. But anyway, it stays high. So when mom and babes are put together, then you start the attachment and bonding cycle between the two of them. And for our kids in the long run, for our newborns, as they become infants and toddlers and on up, a strong attachment to a primary caregiver, generally the mother, so I will usually refer to mom, although it doesn't have to be mom, but generally mom. That attachment is key to how an infant, child, then adult interacts for the rest of their lives. This skin-to-skin contact also has significant impact on health. We know breastfeeding helps to keep obesity down, but the skin-to-skin contact decreases stress levels. With oxytocin high, then you're not triggering the fight or flight mechanisms within the brain, so they're calmer. It's just the way we were made was to be together. Yeah. As a healthcare system, we've done a heck of a lot to separate mothers and infants, and by doing that have caused really a lot of harm, which we can talk about more if you want to.
Yes, it's really interesting, isn't it, that golden hour? Do you want to, like, I've never heard anyone talk about those phases, those 9 phases during the golden hour, but it's very, I mean, both my you know, that first hour is so interesting, you know, because the babies do, you know, move their head going around, where's the breast, you know, blah, 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 blah. And they're just so active, more active than they'll be for a couple more weeks, really. And it's a beautiful process to be part of, although, to be honest, after going through labor and birth, you're kind of like probably not, you know, able to appreciate maybe what otherwise. You're a little bit tired. But do you want to maybe talk about those 9 phases if you want to, and what the baby goes through? It's really interesting.
Well, when the baby is first born and put on the chest, just have a kind of a relaxation phase. They're a little shocked too, having just come through the birth canal, and it's like, what's this world? But it doesn't take very long before they start to kind of alert a bit more, and you'll see their eyes open and kind of looking around. And then as they move, they'll get more and more active, and you'll see their shoulders moving. If they're generally looking at one or the other of the breasts, they may start to reach their hand out and try to touch the nipple, and then bring it back. And they do that because the nipple has similar smells to what the amniotic fluids smell like. And baby's sense of smell is the best it's going to be right after birth, because their olfactory bulb has matured while in labor. And so labor is very important for a lot of the final maturations that our babies need, and the smell, the bulb, the olfactory bulb is one of those that matures at the end. So baby is able to smell mom, which is part of the attachment, can also then smell the pheromones that are being released by Montgomery glands in the areola. They bring that back and they helps them to feel both safe and to know how to find the breast. As they get more active, they'll start moving. They kind of lift themselves a little bit with by pushing their arms down, not a full push-up, but enough to move. And if you were to pick up the blankets and see, you'll see that their legs are literally making crawling motions. So this is why it's called the breast crawl. But they will slowly work themselves over to the breast. And it's a whole process that they go through that is just a natural process of acclimation. And it's one of those things that, at least here in the States, and I think when I've seen births other places, you know, baby gets born and then all of a sudden we think this mom-baby couplet can't do much, so we've taken the baby off and dried them and wrapped them, and then we bring them back to mom. And well, by that time you've started to lose some of these very vital steps that the baby is going through, or processes that the baby is going through. So once the baby gets over to the breast, he or she will try several times, but they start to bob their head.
It's so cute.
Now, bobbing their head is something when moms who are sitting up and breastfeeding and their baby's bobbing their head and you take the back of it and you hold it and push it in. That's a normal way for the babies to find nipple in the breast. And they are then, because they're actually going down, so gravity is helping to bring their heads down over the nipple, they'll eventually open their mouth wide enough and get a good large grip on the areola and the nipple and start to suck. And they may stay there any place from 20 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
Just suckling. They're getting colostrum already, that first milk, which is very important for infection protection, and just beginning to set up the whole immune system within our bodies. They're getting to know mom. Mom frequently will have kind of a glow. Yes, you're tired afterwards, but this gives you kind of a high, because oxytocin is connected with the endorphin system in our bodies. And so you're actually getting natural endorphins also making you feel high. And then prolactin, which is the other hormone for breastfeeding, is also going up into the brain and making changes that'll help this woman become a mom. All of these are so intricately entwined that we in the healthcare system have lost track of how we work together, how moms and babies work together in these initial phases. Last phase of the breast crawl is baby and mom usually both going to sleep, because oxytocin is also a relaxant, so it tends to put them to sleep when they're done. But if you get baby to do that first feeding, you're much more likely to succeed at breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And the other thing in breastfeeding further on is that when baby is comfortable with being put on mom's chest, they'll crawl to the breast each time. And so that all these positions that we've tried, sitting up and lying down and, you know, supporting baby underneath the body to get them in line, really negating the baby's primitive reflexes to getting to the breast. So that moms will have much more success in an earlier milk coming in. They literally lean back, semi-recline, baby skin to skin, and let the baby get to the breast and do the nursing, as opposed to mom trying to nurse the baby.
Yeah. And I mean, not everybody wants to breastfeed and not everybody wants to have a natural birth, but the reason I chose natural birth both times was because I was fortunate enough to have read books like Birthright by Suzanne Ross, and also have a doula the first time who let me know these things. You know, she'd been a doula for like 500 births, you know.
Right.
Like saying like, look, you know, if you can avoid an epidural, do, because if you want to breastfeed, your breastfeeding journey will be completely different, because you'll have a baby who during that first hour, isn't, sleepy and affected by the drugs you take, and they'll be ready to breastfeed, and it'll be in their, encoded in their kind of, neural system how to do it, and life's just easy after that. And I took that path, and if you do want to breastfeed, I just found it really, really simple to breastfeed after that. Do you want to talk about what sort of things might, create like that kind of optimal breastfeeding environment for mums and babies going forward? Like, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, let me react to one thing you said, and that is, yes, not all mothers want to breastfeed. Yeah. However, all mothers need to hold their infant skin to skin.
Yeah.
So it's such a vital, important part of the whole development of our newborns and the development of their brains, and what they're learning. And when we separate mothers and babies, when they're not doing this holding, and my feeling is that there should be skin to skin at least for the first couple of weeks, not the first 6 weeks, and then holding as much as the infant desires, not how much mom or dad want to do it, but how much the infant desires, 2-3 years. Because during that whole time, they are making 1 million, 2 million synapses or connections between the nerve cells in the brain per minute. 1 million to 2 million connections per minute. And each of those connections is learning. And so if we want to help them learn to be social beings, then we need to have them in an habitat or an environment where we're sending signals over the same synapses to connect with the right frontal, I should say it this way, to connect with the right frontal lobe. And at the time of birth, babies basically only have a functioning brainstem, which means that they can keep themselves alive. They need moms to help to regulate just about every other system in their body. So now your question, any questions about that before I?
That's phenomenal. So you need the moms there to help them regulate. Like, I know I used to be involved in like the human rights kind of law and movement, and then I left that all to become a mum, to be honest. I do remember somewhere it popping up the story about the orphanage in China where they if they didn't hold, like, they would give the children everything equal, right? But the ones that didn't get held, they didn't live. And so what you're saying, and so, then that going forward, I always knew whatever else happens, hold your baby, do you want to, I didn't know that the babies depend on the mums, for the rest. Do you want to talk about that and expand that? Because that's new.
Sure. I think the studies you were referring to are actually Romanian studies.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Wrong.
That's fine.
Please forgive me.
I've adopted both my daughters from China, and there were some problems, but it's the Romanian babies that they were really looking at.
Right, thank you.
This all falls into the notion. We talk so much about needing to breastfeed our kids.
Yeah.
But there's a second part to breastfeeding, which kind of comes naturally, and that's the touch. And so my feeling is that we need to start talking about body feeding, about body feeding. Body feeding being what the babies are getting when they're being touched, when they're being held, when you're talking to them, as well as what they're getting from the milk itself. I actually had a mom who was having difficulties with her daughter breastfeeding, and she was in the clinic one day, and I was talking to some others just saying, take some time to talk to your daughter, to play. And she looked at me later and she said, I'm not doing that. And it was almost as if her daughter were kind of a failure to thrive because she wasn't getting any of that other interaction. Mom was so anxious about making sure she was breastfeeding, she wasn't giving those other things that are naturally there. So, as I say, in the skin to skin, and one of the reasons for prolonged skin to skin, it helps to set up the whole immune system that we have, not only the fact that they're much more peaceful or calm, and decreased stress just keeps it down. But from the first time you put baby on mom's skin, you're literally transferring germs from mom to baby. And these are good germs. in Japan for a while, they were having troubles with methicillin-resistant MRSA, the methicillin-resistant Staph aureus.
Yeah.
And what they were finding was that the babies who went to the warmers, which hadn't been thoroughly cleaned, ended up having their skin populated with this MRSA, as opposed to the good bacteria that moms and dads have that can go straight to them. We know that through the milk, the baby gets more of the immune systems, both passively, but also helps in their, as they're developing their whole system. But there are ways that when moms and babies are together, that mom can breathe in or take through the skin, literally antigens or the germs, make antibodies to them, and then through the breast milk or back through the skin, we'll give them back to the baby. Yeah. So that's one system that is really dependent upon moms and babies being together. Yeah. Let's say the whole attachment system and what parts of your brain are being developed. When we separate our infants, separation is any time you're not touching your infant. So all those people who are carrying their babies around in their buckets and things like that, that's separation. But with increasing separation, what you actually get is midbrain development, which is the fight or flight part of the brain. Excuse me. Yeah. And it's when you get midbrain development, you're actually getting more stress hormone development. And it puts that child at much higher risk for things like depression, addiction, anger response, some of the abusive things. I know when I've listened to some of the mass killers that we've had around here, I can almost just from their basic descriptions begin to say this person did not have a strong attachment. Yeah. Certainly there are other things that are going to impact attachment as an infant goes. If we can get a good platform starting right at the beginning, then it makes a significant difference to their cognitive development, their social development, behavioral development. Babies who are held most of the time won't cry.
Yeah.
You know, and I know grandparents will say, but you're spoiling the baby, you're spoiling the baby. But you aren't, because we are still so connected to each other. In many respects, will always be connected. But in this first time, baby's gut doesn't work. So they need to be held and carried to get the movement from the parents to help them pass their meconium or their stools. Just moving the whole gut system. We've talked, or the big thing now is the microbiome, which goes back to that infection protection sort of thing. Getting the right germs, both from vaginal delivery and then from breastfeeding and things like that. But the right microbiome also then impacts brain development and how we react to other foods. So there's a very strong symbiotic relationship between mothers and babies. And another primary caregiver who provides what mothers generally do, but instinctively mothers want to have and hold their babies as much as they possibly can. And in many societies, they carry their babies all the time. Now the thing about holding is you don't have to be interacting with them. You just have to be near you, on you.
They're watching, they're looking, what's going on.
You know? Yeah, exactly.
They're learning.
They're learning, right. That's how close we are in the way we were made. And in Western societies in particular, we've kind of said, okay, once they're born, they're little adults, or they're totally independent and they can sleep in a different room and they don't have to sleep beside mom, and they, and we're actually have created through that some of the social problems that we have right now. Lack of trust and a number of other things.
Yeah, it's, look, I can definitely vouch for that symbiosis that happens, that's synchronicity, because I know like women who live together, they might have, synchronized periods, but me as a mum, like I knew when my babies had to poo, because I would feel like I had to poo, or I'd know they were suffering. I'd know they were hungry because I would feel hungry. Like, and then it was like your bodies match up, even though they're an entirely separate theoretically body. But, you know, they think that they're still part of you. They only kind of identify as being once, you know, in you and now part of you, you know, like they don't, you can't really, so like, it's like you can't really spoil them because it's just spoiling yourself, you know. Maybe people happy mummies, come on, you know.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I have become more interested in a lot of the studies about IQ, and that breastfeeding babies have, you know, 3 to 5 points higher IQ than many other infants. And I realized the last study that came out, came out from Brazil, and they had in late 80s had a cohort of 5,000 babies that they followed as to how much they were breastfeeding and interactions and things. And in the early part of this century, they were able to find at least 3,000 of those babies who are now adults. And they were looking at length of breastfeeding and some other things as to where they were job-wise, whether they had advanced schooling, their income, see if there was any association with breastfeeding, and they found a very strong association. Well, some of the doctors that I heard talking about it is, well, we don't know that that's really true, that it's the that it's the breastfeeding / breast milk that makes them smarter. But we don't want to make moms who are bottle feeding feel guilty because they're not breastfeeding and all of this. And by that time, what I realized is that, again, we're forgetting the other vital component of breastfeeding. And if you're going to breastfeed, then you're holding your baby.
Yeah.
Which means they're getting the touch. Yeah. And at a minimum, you're getting extra, if they're doing 8 feedings a day, and say each feeding lasts about half an hour, at minimum, they're getting 4 hours of extra touch per day, as opposed to an infant who may be in a car seat or crib and who, if mom's holding them, they take 10 minutes to bottle feed, at the most. Any extra time makes a very significant difference in what's happening with the babies. That synchrony, as you were saying, Ruth Feldman and others, but Ruth Feldman from Israel has done a lot looking at mother-infant and parent-infant synchrony. Communication that you get between mothers and infants, something that continues all the way through. You know, you can tell when something's wrong with your child, even if they don't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. You can kind of give a guess. My mother, I used to kind of love some of her stories, particularly with my youngest sister, but my youngest sister hopped a train one night from Whitehorse back to Fairbanks, and my mom says that she was real concerned that everything was all right with my younger sister, and then all of a sudden she could relax. Well, that was when my sister had made it back to Fairbanks and was safe, having ridden in great big silver pipes on the train. There's a synchrony that just comes, and that continues to provide a support then for our infants as they become school agers, as they become teenagers.
Yes.
And that, you know, knowing that you have that strong a connection, you're part of a group, so to speak, you know, as opposed to those infants who have more of a midbrain connection and they're thinking they need to check themselves. It's me sort of thing. Sometimes out of some narcissism, or it's what I want. They're not as caring. They will flare up and get mad very quickly because they haven't had stress levels set lower. But it's that whole bit of what's happening within babies' bodies as they begin to mature and become adults. Because, you know, brain maturation doesn't really, well, it's always changing, but you know, full maturation doesn't occur until they're 24 years old or something like that. But as first years, if we can get a good, strong platform or baseline, it just makes the rest of their lives in general easier.
It's so important, isn't it? All of this that we're talking about. You know, I know I'm wondering if this has got anything to do with those mirror neurons that have been discovered, you know, because I do notice that if my kids are upset about something, if I calm my own system down, my body down, obviously, you know, they'll like peak. They'll be like suddenly really like upset or excited. I'm like, oh my God, am I doing enough here? And then they'll come down, you know, it's kind of like.
Yeah, that's part of it. Those mirror neurons are a very important part of the communication. And that communication that we're setting up isn't just spoken language. It is, how do you read body language? How do you read what's in the eyes? And there's been some interesting work along those lines by, oh shoot, she's up in Canada. Her name is slipping right now. It'll come. Anyway, she had a group of babies whom they had 6 hours of kangaroo care, skin-to-skin care. These are full-term infants during the first week of life, and then I think about 4 hours a day for the next month or more. And what she found when she did still face, and still face is when you're interacting with your baby and then you all of a sudden go blank. And babies want that attention back again. What she found is that babies at 1 month were already doing social smiles. They were beginning to smile at their moms when they did it as a way of saying, hey, come back to me. And generally, and we've seen that, we say that it happens at about 3 months. And then by 3 months, they were social cueing, meaning they were actually, you know, reaching their hand out to their mom, maybe ultimately turning away because mom wasn't giving any attention. And that, in the early experiments of still face, had not occurred until 7 months. So there's a maturation and an understanding that occurs between moms and babes as they're going forward, just because of that closeness. What we have done as a society, in particular through our healthcare system, is to really begin to make mothers feel that they are not, that they aren't able to necessarily care for their infants, and that we need to take them away because healthcare providers know better. In reality, moms know very well what they need to do to take care of their infants and how it needs to be done. And we need to kind of undo all of these things that we love, our love of technology, to say, this technical being, if you want to call us that, this being of mom is what's most significant for our babies. I can't hear you.
It really harks to how important it is for there to be systems of like paid maternity leave, I think, for mums, because I've been a single mum, I've been a contract worker, and I've done kangaroo care regardless, and I've been with my babies regardless. You know, it's if you aren't that fortunate that you can do that and you don't have any options, you know, and you have to go back to work, you know, and your baby has to go into childcare from an early age and has to have that separation. You know, as a society, we need to make sure that doesn't happen. If that means that that person down the track isn't going to, you know, be, you know, their best selves and be, you know, feel safe and feel like they can trust society, and you know, if it means that it's not actually a cost to society to provide, you know, that maternity leave, that paid maternity leave, it's actually going to pay off for society. It's like
right.
investment to make sure that mum can stay with that baby and that mum feels looked after and that mum feels safe, you know, because if that baby feels safe, it's going to change the next, you know, 30, 50, 60, 70 years of the future, you know, to be good, to be beneficial. Yeah.
One of my cousin's daughters had a baby in May, and she had maternity leave ultimately through the summer. And when I saw them this summer, they were saying that now her husband was going to take over because he could take maternity leave or paternity leave 12 weeks, but it didn't matter. It didn't have to be the first 12 weeks. So that for essentially the first 6 months of their son's life, one of the parents was going to be with them almost continuously. And I was really pleased to appreciate, I mean, I really appreciated that they were able to do that. And I know a lot of parents can't. And the thing about this extra holding is it doesn't have to be all the time. We say as much as possible, but if mom has to work or dad has to work, well, when they get home, then they need to spend the evening or morning time or whatever, what time they have, interacting, preferably holding their infants. And again, kind of my example with the breastfeeding and saying the fact that they're just getting 4 hours or more. As long as they're getting some touch is so vital to our development across the roles, but as long as they're getting some of that, it's going to enhance that development of that infant, as opposed to mom coming home, I'm exhausted, baby's been in the car seat most of the day, we'll let baby continue to sit there. Maybe they'll come in and watch me cook, but baby's still in the car seat. And that's a mentality that we've gotten into in particular Western care, which is just wrong. Just totally wrong.
Yeah. So if like you do have to go back to work, but you get home 6 or 7, just get that baby, pop them in their wrap on your chest, and if you have to cook, maybe get food deliveries instead. For a few weeks, you can cuddle that baby.
Yeah. But the other thing is there are wraps that are being made, and some very specifically for doing skin-to-skin care, but that hold the baby here in front and allows you to be hand-free.
Like a t-shirt you put on, and I've seen someone like Facebook being advertised. It's like a t-shirt. So it actually looks to anyone else like a t-shirt, but you're kind of like a baby, got a baby popped in there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've used shirts of all types when I've been showing moms in the hospital. It's just, a cami top that has a little bit of elastic to it. Elastic doesn't last a long time, but, or a t-shirt or anything that, yes, you can slip the baby under, make sure that you can see the face, and then tuck it in, have a good elastic pants so the baby isn't going to fall out the bottom. But moms are very aware of where babies are when they're holding them and when they're sleeping with them, if they're breastfeeding moms. Because of that synchrony or that sense of symbioticness that they have of what their needs are. And again, we are so wonderfully and beautifully made. We just aren't allowing that to express itself.
Yeah.
Moms, when they first come home, will probably feel much more relaxed too the minute they pick up baby, because the minute they pick up baby, you have oxytocin going, which will help them to relax. And they may not get dinner because they've fallen asleep, but they are having their baby time.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Do you know some great information about how milk's actually made? Do you want to share some of that with us? Because that's all news to us, probably.
Sure. During a first pregnancy, and then during each pregnancy, the breasts actually go through a maturation process. They are not fully developed to be able to make milk when you first get pregnant. And so during pregnancy, with lactin and progesterone and some of the other hormones that are circling around, they literally begin to form what we call lacrimal glands, the little things that have a hole in the middle of it, basically, so that milk can be made. And the cells around the edge of those lacrimal glands are where the milk gets produced. So blood will bring prolactin, which is the primary milk producing hormone, as opposed to oxytocin, which is the milk releasing hormone. So prolactin comes up to those cells, and there's some special receptors, so it hooks on, and then it creates quite a juncture of making messenger RNA and things within the cell that goes into the center of the cell, ultimately to make the milk casein and the other milk components. And then it gets put in the lumen, and from the lumen of the cell, it goes down the ducts to all come there. So when mom is breastfeeding, oxytocin levels will go quite high, particularly at the beginning, because the oxytocin literally causes the muscles within each of those ducts to squeeze out the milk. Once mom has emptied the breast, and the more you empty the breast, the more milk you'll make. Once the breast is empty, then the oxytocin levels fall, and that allows the prolactin to come back in to make more milk. And it'll keep up that cycle as long as you're breastfeeding regularly. When moms miss a few feedings, then what happens is the prolactin level starts to drop. Now, the other thing that's key about early breastfeedings is that prolactin levels are higher right at birth. Right at birth, the oxytocin is the highest, but prolactin has been slowly climbing. And in order to make milk, you need these prolactin receptors to come into the cells around the lumen of them.
Yeah.
And with those high levels of prolactin, the prolactin receptors can actually what we call upregulate or come into the cells where they are. And one of the reasons it's so important for frequent breastfeeding then at the beginning is because the more prolactin receptors we can upregulate, the more milk mom is going to be able to make. And so those mothers who don't get to breastfeed a lot initially, those mothers who here in the States we would send home at day 2 and she'd babies had barely woken up and she may not even have had a good breastfeeding, much more likely to have insufficient milk supply because they haven't been able to upregulate the prolactin receptors. And once the prolactin levels go down, never gone, but down towards their baseline, you can't get it up again to help do the upregulation. And so that early breastfeeding or early pumping for moms whose babies are in the NICU or for some reason they can't breastfeed immediately or within the first hour, 4 hours after birth, and we have them start pumping, that is so significant because that's what's helping to make milk supply.
Yeah, amazing. It's incredible stuff. Now, you've been around teaching now for 30 years. You've obviously...
35, well, almost 35 years in OB.
That's like, longer than a lot of us listening probably have even been alive. A long time. I'm perpetually 30.
Okay.
But how do women come and connect with you and find out about what you're doing and maybe follow you or get educated by you? How do they find you?
Well, I do have a website out there, which is www.drbarb, DRBARBCNM.com.
Wow.
And I have a lot of my information out there. I'm also available on Facebook and LinkedIn. Those are the two I follow most closely. You can tweet me, but I won't guarantee that you'll necessarily get a response.
Yeah.
And I think it's up there. Another way that I am trying to get things out to whatever group would like is that I will go do speeches or talks, to conference or whatever, so that this word can continue to get out. And I'm continuing to work on resources both for professionals and for parents related to breastfeeding and kangaroo care and body feeding, providing the sensory nutrients that our infants need, and things of that nature. I believe my website also has my home address. My email, if you want to connect with me directly, is barb@drbarbcnm.com.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Look, we'll talk to you again soon, Barb. I'll ask before we go. I'll just ask this question because this was really intriguing to me, and I'd like to hear what your thoughts were. You write somewhere that about the language of the newborn, and of course we're having a baby. We're going to be meeting our newborn. What is the language of a newborn?
Thank you for asking the question. the language of the newborn is really what the newborn is doing. Now, if you get some of the books by Sparrow, Brazelton, and some others, they'll talk about these primitive neonatal reflexes that babies have as the language of the newborn. What I've found is if you are really looking at what baby's doing when they're crawling, if you notice that they literally even in the first hour, they'll start to make tiny sounds to moms.
Dude, mine was like a little budgie. My second baby, she would sound like a little budgie for the first few days. Like that. I was like, I'm in the bed with me. Budgie exactly. A tiny little parrot from Australia, and they sit there going like that all day. So like,
but they're trying to get mom's attention. They do all sorts of things. Now, when they're hungry, something that I hadn't seen in the list of cues for being hungry, goes a little all sorts of things. But one of them is if you're holding a baby with the head up on the shoulder and they're hungry, they'll start sliding down your arm. Guess what? They're looking for a breast. It's that when they get bigger, then they don't have to be on you to crawl, but they'll just slide down to where they want to be.
Babies are strong as well. Just don't think that babies just lie there and they're floppy. Like they're muscle. Like it's like you're wrestling. If they want to go down your arm, they're going down your arm.
They're down your arm, yeah. Exactly. So it's a lot of these little things that if you become aware of what's happening, and this is where the more the holding, the more the synchrony between moms and babies, because moms are beginning to pick up on these little signs. But I also have found if I can help moms, say right after birth, and I'm saying, okay, look at what your baby's doing and how they're beginning to just rub their lips across your upper chest. They're kind of looking for your breast, but they're also getting to know your taste and your smell. And all of those little movements that they make are really ways that baby is beginning to tell you something. And so that's what I mean. My whole kind of definition of the language of the newborns has changed when as I've watched more and more newborns in particular crawling and smiling. I mean, they will start to respond smile-wise. It may not be the full-fledged smile, but you usually get a little turn their lips when you're talking to them or smiling at them. They start to mimic what you're doing almost immediately. Yeah. So if you can begin to kind of realize that they are in their way talking, and take those messages that you get early. As we say for breastfeeding, crying is a late sign.
Yeah.
Crying is a late sign for anything. It means, Mom or Dad, you haven't caught everything else I'm trying to tell you.
I've noticed my son, I'm not sure about my daughter. I remember my son, I'd know he'd want milk because he'd start going like that, with his lips. It was like clear he was wanting to suck. But he'd go,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've been interested. I remember seeing my niece when she was about 6 months old, and her mom was holding her, and she was doing this falling down off the shoulder. And I thought, even there's still that essence of the crawl happening. Yeah. Get down to mom's breast. That's where they want to be. When they get bigger, they'll just go, here, Mom, I want to breastfeed. But,
come and grab it, really.
Yeah, right. But so that's what I mean by the language. It's getting to know what the eyes are saying, what the mouth is saying or demonstrating, and just appreciating that they're already giving you messages.
Thank you so much, Barb. You've brought up so many beautiful, possibilities, and just so much, usefulness in the tools that you've given us and wisdom, because a lot of this happens, we just experience it and we don't really understand why. I mean, we learn through the experience, but it's sometimes, it's helpful to know a bit beforehand as well. So for a lot of reasons, hey. So,
And I just find it so fascinating that I want to help parents and providers understand what is happening. And as I say, that second miracle of just seeing how moms and babies begin to interact together from the time they're put on the mom's chest.
it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful period. And I can just imagine why so, you know, people really love and want to be, you know, a midwife, you know, or you know, a maternity doctor, because, you know, you just are there at this beautiful miracle moment in time, you know, where a new life is connecting and bonding and experiencing, and, you know, that the whole life journey of that person afterwards is going to happen, you know, and you're there at that moment of you know, fulfillment, you know, and opening. So
Right.
yeah, thank you today, Barb, and thank you everyone who's been listening. Check out more of the Learning to Birth webinars, and of course come and follow us on social media at Learn to Birth and learningtobirth.com, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you, Barb.
Thank you.